Have you ever wondered why no matter how strong or independent someone appears, there's a silent fortress around their heart? One that crumbles not under force, but when met with a very specific kind of understanding. Today we will explore the hidden truth behind avoidant souls and why they always unravel when you finally understand what truly lies beneath their distance. Avoidant attachment is not a fixed personality trait or a sign of emotional superiority. It is a carefully built psychological defense system forged in the early years of emotional development. It arises not out of conscious choice, but as an adaptive response to an environment where vulnerability was not met with safety and where expressing emotional needs often led to pain, shame, or disappointment. The avoidant child, exposed to caregivers who were inconsistent, dismissive, emotionally unavailable, or overwhelmed themselves, learned one core message: connection is unreliable, and to need others is dangerous. In such an environment, the child doesn't learn to trust the emotional attunement of others. They begin to internalize the belief that independence equals survival. If closeness is not safe, then distance must be. Over time, this adaptive strategy becomes their default lens through which all relationships are filtered. What may appear on the surface as self-reliance, stoicism, or emotional maturity is often a deeper, quieter fear of intimacy. It is not that avoidantly attached individuals do not feel, it is that their feelings are deeply buried, organized behind mental walls, and kept at a distance even from themselves. They disconnect not because they don't care, but because caring too much threatens their sense of stability. This detachment becomes a psychological identity. I don't need anyone. It creates a sense of control. But this is not genuine independence, it is emotional exoskeleton. Armor that protects a much more tender inner reality. In adulthood, this results in a paradox. Avoidants often crave connection and love on a subconscious level, but when it starts to manifest in real intimacy, it activates their ancient defense system. Closeness begins to feel like entrapment. Emotional demands feel overwhelming, so they pull away. They withdraw, minimize, rationalize. They dismiss or ridicule the partner's emotions, not because they don't matter, but because they are overwhelming reminders of their own disowned needs. What makes this defense even more difficult to confront is that it is often reinforced by culture and personal narratives. The avoidant may take pride in being independent or logical. They may see emotional expressiveness as weak or chaotic. In doing so, they protect themselves from shame, but also from growth. Their relationships remain shallow or transactional, not out of malice, but out of fear of the depths they cannot safely swim in. To see avoidant attachment as a defense reframes the entire dynamic. It removes the moral judgment and replaces it with understanding. These individuals are not villains. They are children in adult bodies who were never taught how to hold closeness without fearing annihilation. Their emotional withdrawal is not a rejection of others, but a rejection of the internal chaos they have not yet learned to face. What is often mistaken for genuine independence in avoidantly attached individuals is in truth a fragile construct built to shield them from vulnerability. While they may appear self-sufficient, emotionally distant, or even proudly autonomous, their independence is often not rooted in a healthy self-concept, but in fear. Specifically the fear of dependence, disappointment, and emotional engulfment. This form of independence is a reaction, not a foundation. It is less about strength and more about survival. For the avoidant, relying on others is associated with risk. Somewhere in their developmental experience, needing someone equated to being hurt, shamed, rejected, or left unmet. As a result, they learn to suppress not only their emotional needs, but the very awareness of those needs. They develop narratives that reinforce this suppression. I don't need anyone. I do better alone. Or, emotions just complicate things. These aren't merely beliefs. They are defensive mantras, unconsciously repeated to maintain emotional distance, not only from others, but from their own inner world. When we look more closely, this so-called independence begins to show cracks. While avoidant individuals may function well in work environments, intellectual pursuits, or solitary hobbies, they often struggle in the emotional dimension of life. Intimacy becomes threatening, not because they are incapable of love, but because love threatens to expose the very needs and longings they've spent a lifetime managing. To need is to lose control. To depend is to risk being abandoned. Therefore, they construct lives that minimize emotional risk, often unconsciously gravitating toward partners who chase, accommodate, or remain emotionally preoccupied, so they themselves don't have to confront the truth of their inner dependence. This illusion of independence also creates a kind of spiritual loneliness. On the surface, the avoidant appears fine, even content, but beneath that facade lies a silent ache, a longing for connection, closeness, and being understood. The tragedy is that this longing is buried so deeply under layers of rationalization, pride, and detachment that they often don't recognize it themselves. When moments of real connection do occur, the avoidant may feel discomfort rather than joy. Instead of leaning into closeness, they recoil. Their nervous system interprets intimacy as a threat, not a comfort. In this way, the very connection they crave is the same connection they sabotage. This is why their independence is not true freedom. It is reactive, constrained by unresolved emotional patterns that limit their capacity to relate deeply. It may grant temporary safety, but it does so at the cost of intimacy, connection, and authentic emotional experience. Underneath the cool exterior and polished detachment is often a psyche that has never known what it feels like to need without shame, to be close without fear, and to be loved without condition. Their independence is not a reflection of inner strength, but a structure built in response to a world that once taught them closeness was dangerous. Avoidantly attached individuals are often assumed to fear abandonment, much like those with anxious attachment. But the true fear at the core of the avoidant psyche is more subtle and elusive. It is the fear of being truly seen. Not seen in a superficial way, as competent, attractive, or self-sufficient, but seen in their emotional nakedness, in their confusion, shame, and need. To be seen in this way would mean the collapse of the carefully guarded image they have spent years constructing, often unconsciously. That image is one of strength, control, and rationality, but beneath it lies a wounded self, buried under layers of emotional avoidance and intellectual defenses. This fear of being seen is deeply rooted in early developmental experiences. The avoidant child likely grew up in an environment where emotional vulnerability was not mirrored, validated, or responded to with warmth. When they expressed distress, neediness, or dependency, they were met with coldness, disinterest, or subtle rejection. Over time, they internalize the belief that to be emotionally open is to invite pain or humiliation. As a result, they disconnected from their own emotional world and began to present a version of themselves that was less reactive, more self-contained, and emotionally impenetrable. In adulthood, this takes the form of distancing behaviors, intellectualization, or emotional minimization. They may offer love in practical ways but struggle to express it verbally or physically. They may seem calm and in control during conflict, but it is a detached calm, often masking inattention. When someone gets too close, When emotional intimacy threatens to peel back the layers, they retreat. This retreat is not just about avoiding conflict, it is a defense against the unbearable possibility of being known. To be known would mean facing their own emotional hunger, their long-suppressed longing for closeness, acceptance, and comfort. These are not emotions they have learned to manage. Instead, they have been exiled into the unconscious, where they manifest through irritability, detachment, or passive-aggressive behavior. When a partner attempts to understand or penetrate this wall, the avoidant feels cornered. They may criticize, withdraw, or shut down entirely, not because they do not care, but because caring brings them into contact with parts of themselves they have long disowned. This inner disownment is the true source of fear. The avoidant does not fear others seeing their behaviors. They fear others seeing their truth. That truth includes dependency, vulnerability, and a deep-seated insecurity that they are unworthy of love unless they remain in control. Being truly seen threatens their survival strategy. It challenges the narrative that they are safest when distant, most powerful when alone, and most in control when unemotional. The gaze of a conscious other, especially one who sees without judgment, becomes unbearable. It exposes what they cannot accept in themselves. This is why emotional intimacy is met, not with warmth, but with withdrawal, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. To be seen is to risk the collapse of the false self they have mistaken for their identity. The avoidant personality structure maintains control, not through domination or overt manipulation, but through the subtler act of emotional withdrawal. This withdrawal is not simply avoidance of conflict or discomfort. It is the very mechanism by which the avoidant preserves a sense of internal equilibrium. Intimacy, true, vulnerable connection, feels destabilizing to the avoidant. It challenges the unconscious belief that closeness leads to engulfment, the loss of self, or inevitable disappointment. Therefore, in moments when intimacy begins to form, the avoidant unconsciously pulls back. This retreat may be physical, distancing themselves from conversations or activities, or emotional, in the form of silence, apathy, sarcasm, or shutting down. The retreat is not random, it is strategic. When closeness activates feelings of vulnerability, the avoidant regains a sense of power by disengaging. This detachment serves two purposes. First, it regulates their inner emotional state, numbing feelings that feel unsafe to express. Second, it exerts control over the relationship dynamic. Withdrawal becomes a form of silent authority. By becoming unavailable, they shift the emotional balance, often causing the other person to pursue, to question themselves, or to try harder. This dynamic reinforces the avoidant's sense of control. They don't have to express dominance. They simply make themselves absent, and the imbalance does the work for them. What complicates this further is that the avoidant rarely recognizes this as control. To them, it feels like self-protection, self-regulation, or even fairness. They might believe they're not ready to talk, or that space is needed, and in many cases those beliefs are sincere. But beneath these justifications lies a deeper fear that being emotionally available would expose them to rejection or would require them to confront feelings they've long kept at bay. The act of withdrawing is an unconscious boundary, not to keep others out maliciously, but to keep themselves from being overwhelmed. In relationships, this pattern creates a cycle that is both predictable and painful. The partner reaches out, seeks connection, expresses emotion. The avoidant, feeling the emotional intensity rise, retreats, physically, mentally, or emotionally. The partner, feeling abandoned or invalidated, pursues more intensely. The avoidant then withdraws further. Over time, this cycle erodes intimacy and fosters confusion and resentment. The avoidant maintains control not by assertion, but by passivity. It is the control of the absent presence, of the locked door, of the unspoken. This withdrawal is also self-protective against their own emotional chaos. The avoidant individual is often afraid not only of others' emotions, but of their own. Emotional proximity forces them to confront feelings of fear, shame, or inadequacy, feelings they have never learned to tolerate. Withdrawal then becomes a way of preserving a fragmented sense of self. By keeping emotions and others at arm's length, they can continue believing they are in control of their inner world, even as intimacy slowly slips away. The tragedy lies in this. In the effort to protect themselves, they inadvertently perpetuate the very loneliness and disconnection they unconsciously fear most. The avoidant individual often feels most secure when others are trying to win their approval or closeness. The dynamic of pursuit and withdrawal provides a sense of emotional balance that, while unstable, feels familiar and manageable. When their partner chases them, seeking connection, reassurance, or intimacy, the avoidant can maintain the illusion of control. They remain the one who sets the boundaries, the one who decides when to engage or retreat. This gives them a feeling of power in the relationship, even if it is illusory. The true turning point occurs when the avoidant's partner stops chasing, when the pursuit ends and the avoidant sees that their usual tactics no longer provoke the expected response. Their sense of control is disrupted. The avoidant relies on others' efforts to bridge the emotional gap. Without that push from the partner, the avoidant's carefully constructed defenses begin to wobble. The distance they've maintained suddenly feels less like safety and more like isolation. The quiet withdrawal that once felt like protection becomes a prison. This shift often goes unnoticed at first. The avoidant may feel a creeping discomfort or restlessness. They may experience an unfamiliar longing or vulnerability that unsettles their usual equilibrium. Because they are not used to being the pursued or feeling emotionally unsettled, these feelings can be confusing and frightening. They may respond by becoming more open or by testing boundaries, sometimes appearing to soften or seek connection in ways they never have before. This is the moment when their defenses begin to crack. It is important to understand that this unraveling is not about the avoidant suddenly becoming emotionally available in a healthy way. Instead, it is often a sign of their internal system struggling to adapt to a new reality, one where their partner no longer plays the role of the pursuer. This disruption forces them to confront feelings they have long avoided: loneliness, need, and fear of abandonment, without the familiar dynamics that allowed them to keep these feelings at bay. For the partner who understands this pattern, the key is not to chase harder, but to maintain clarity, boundaries, and self-respect. By stepping out of the pursuit role, they send a powerful message. Their emotional worth is not dependent on the avoidant's approval or distance. This shift is often what shakes the avoidant to their core, because it challenges the very foundation of their emotional strategy. The avoidant's sense of control crumbles, not because they suddenly lose interest or because they want to push the partner away, but because the dynamic that supported their defense has changed. Without the familiar chase, they face an emotional void they are ill-equipped to fill. This is the vulnerable space where true change can begin, but it requires patience, compassion, and often a willingness to accept discomfort on both sides. Avoidants crumble when their partners finally stop running after them, not out of anger or resentment, but because the avoidant's false sense of security is exposed. The delicate balance of pursuit and withdrawal collapses, forcing them to reckon with their own unmet needs and fears. This moment of unraveling is both terrifying and transformative, opening a pathway toward deeper self-awareness and the possibility of genuine intimacy. Avoidantly attached individuals often wield emotional withdrawal as a form of control, but their power depends heavily on the reactions they provoke in others. When their partner reacts with anxiety, desperation, or confusion, the avoidant feels a sense of dominance by remaining distant and unreachable. However, the avoidant begins to crumble, not when their partner pursues with fear or frustration, but when their partner mirrors detachment, not as a defense born of fear, but as a state of clear, calm awareness. This mirroring of detachment is profoundly disarming because it breaks the cycle the avoidant depends on. Instead of chasing, pleading, or trying to decode the avoidant's emotional unavailability, the partner responds with emotional clarity and self-possession. This is not coldness or rejection, but a steady presence that neither demands nor withdraws. It is an emotional equilibrium that refuses to engage in the push-pull game that defines avoidant dynamics. When the avoidant encounters this calm reflection, their usual methods lose their grip. Their withdrawal no longer triggers anxiety or attempts to re-engage. It meets quiet understanding instead. This clarity exposes the avoidant's emotional strategy as what it truly is, a defense against vulnerability rather than a genuine expression of self. The avoidant sees that the power they thought they held was dependent on others' emotional reactivity, and without it, their control evaporates. This moment of exposure can be deeply unsettling. The avoidant's defenses are built to avoid just this kind of emotional clarity because it threatens their carefully maintained illusion of independence and safety. When faced with a partner who no longer chases or gets caught in emotional turmoil, the avoidant is forced to confront their own loneliness, fears, and unmet needs, realities they have long avoided. The familiar armor of withdrawal feels suddenly thin and insufficient. Importantly, this response from the partner is not manipulative or punitive. It arises from a place of self-awareness and emotional maturity. It signals that the partner is not willing to be drawn into unhealthy dynamics or to compromise their own well-being to maintain the relationship. This calm boundary holding invites the avoidant to see themselves without distortion, to acknowledge their fears without judgment, and to begin the difficult work of integrating vulnerability into their sense of self. The avoidance crumbling is not a breakdown in the negative sense, but a necessary unraveling of illusions that have kept them stuck. It opens a space for genuine growth and healing, provided it is met with patience and compassion rather than frustration or anger. In this way, the partner's emotional clarity becomes a catalyst, not for punishment, but for transformation. Thus, avoidants crumble when they face a reflection of detachment rooted in clarity, not fear. This clarity dissolves their emotional power and exposes the wounds beneath their defenses. It is the quiet, unwavering presence that does not react but simply is, and in that presence, the avoidant encounters the possibility of true intimacy and self-acceptance. Understanding avoidant attachment is not about assigning blame or labeling behavior, but about recognizing a profound human struggle, a struggle rooted in fear, survival, and the longing for connection. Avoidants build walls not to keep others out, but to keep themselves safe from old wounds that never healed. Their apparent independence masks a fragile defense against vulnerability, and their emotional withdrawal serves as both shield and silent cry for help. Yet, these defenses begin to dissolve when met with emotional clarity, patience, and a refusal to engage in the endless chase. It is in this space, where calm acceptance replaces pursuit, that the avoidant confronts their deepest fears and has the opportunity to step toward genuine intimacy. To truly understand avoidance is to hold space for their pain without judgment, and to realize that beneath the distance lies a yearning for connection just as deep as anyone's. Only then can transformation begin, and with it, the possibility of healing and authentic relationship.